I decided that I was going to make the shift, leave this world of golden handcuffs and private equity to combine purpose with wealth and have a bit more balance.
Welcome to the Legacy Branding Podcast. I'm your host, Laura Beauparlant, here to guide you through the journey of selling your business and building a personal brand that leaves a lasting impact. On the show, we'll explore real-life founder stories, expert insights, and actionable strategies to help you navigate the transition, avoid post-sale crisis, and create your impact-driven legacy brand. Whether you're thinking of selling, building to sell, or already on the other side, this podcast is your go-to resource for making your next evolution your best one yet. Let's dive in. Today on the Legacy Branding Podcast, I'm joined by Nick Bradley. Nick is a world-renowned author, speaker, and business growth expert who works with entrepreneurs, business leaders, and investors to build, scale, and sell high-value companies. He spent 10 plus years working in private equity, where he saw over 100 acquisitions, 26 exits, and over $5 billion in combined value created. But now he's flipped the script. Through his company, High Value Exit, and his top-ranked podcast, Scale Up with Nick Bradley, he helps founders grow businesses that are not only highly profitable, but truly sellable. He's here to give entrepreneurs the freedom and wealth and impact that they deserve. Nick, welcome to the show.
What a lovely intro. That was fantastic. I get emotive sometimes when I think about as you said, flipping the script, because it was about 12 years in total in private equity. And there was a long history before that in the world of corporate. And we talked about purpose before pressing record. And I don't think I found my true purpose until I decided to work exclusively on the entrepreneurial side.
Interesting. And when I was sort of deep diving into you before this, I read something in your bio about the golden handcuffs and that you actually called it prison. That was how you described it, the golden handcuffs of success. And I think a lot of people have experienced that. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about that shift, because the story is compelling, going from building wealth for others in private equity, probably to the detriment of the business owners that you were trying to buy their businesses, now to being on the other side to really help them build that value and sell for more on their terms. So what triggered that? What was the catalyst?
Yeah, there's a few things. I'll go back a little bit in the story because it's like lots of things. It's a relatively long and winding. It's, you know how when you look back in hindsight, you see things for what they are, but when you're in the thick of it,
Absolutely.
you don't see it. So I started off, I had a business that I founded, if you like, when I was 18, and I sold it at 21 in Adelaide, South Australia. And it was a small personal training business, but you've got to think this is back in the late 80s, early 90s when personal training wasn't even a thing. So I had lots of quite high net worth individuals coming to me wanting personal training. And I sold that business for 3,000 Australian dollars. So I call that my first exit, but it's not exactly like it might buy you a Starbucks coffee these days, right? Something like that. But I look back now and I think, what did I do? Well, I started a business, I grew a business, it was pretty successful. I kind of freaked out that I sort of had this feeling, if you like, that I'm not an entrepreneur. And then I went into the world of corporate and private equity for the next few decades. And it's only 6 years ago that I left that world to do what I'm doing now that I suddenly feel a connection to what I was doing again when I was like in my late teens. But the reason I left the world of entrepreneurship at a young age is I had people around me at that point in time. And I think for all good reasons, they saw being an entrepreneur risky. And they had always valued this concept of security, which is get a job, work your way up. And so because I hadn't done that, it was a bit sort of conflictive with their views. And it probably was one of the reasons why I left Adelaide and went to Sydney, because I realized I had to sort of change my environment. But that then opened up a whole heap of other things. So I ended up working for pretty much the biggest media company in the world for a number of years. So News International, reported into Lachlan Murdoch, so Rupert Murdoch's son. I then ended up working for another media group called EMAP, which is the second biggest publishing group in the UK. And they're the ones who transitioned me from living in Sydney to now living in the UK. I started doing a lot of M&A work for them. They got sold and broken up by private equity in 2008. And it was the biggest exit that happened globally before the market crash. So it was a 2.3 billion pound breakup. And I learned a lot of how not to do things, how to do things. But anyway, I learned a lot about what it takes to kind of create that level of value, but doing it in some, you could call it scrupulous ways. Anyway, I ended up then going to work for a big media company called Getty Images out of New York. And we did 41 acquisitions while I was there. And then I went into the world of private equity for the next decade. To answer your question, it all changed when I met my father, who came back into my life after leaving when I was 2 years of age. And I hadn't
Right.
seen him for 36 years. Now, he was a very successful entrepreneur, had a business in Melbourne, Australia that got blown up actually when there was a terrorist attack on the Turkish consulate in Melbourne, lost everything, and then went and started another business, and that became super successful as well. Now, I met him after all of this had happened, but he comes back into my life, and as he's doing that, I'm closing one of the biggest deals of my career, and I start to have an epiphany about who I am and what my values are now that I've met my dad, and realize he's super entrepreneurial, and I start to realize maybe I'm a bit more like that than I gave myself credit for. So all those years in corporate, I was kind of living this false pretense, if you like, of trying to fit into a situation that probably wasn't my true calling. And
Right.
I did some pretty horrific stuff in that world, which we can get into. I'm quite happy to share it because the world of private equity is unapologetically about money. But after I met my dad, and he ended up passing away a short time after that as well because he had cancer, I decided at that point that I was going to make the shift and leave this world of golden handcuffs and private equity and all the money to combine purpose with wealth and have a bit more balance.
I love that idea of purpose and wealth because I think a lot of people think you can have one or the other.
I thought that as well. I thought I chose money for a long time. But as I said, like when you look back in hindsight, you start to realize different choices. And I was running away from a lot of different things in that environment. And the way that I ran away from it was to be relentless at what was deemed success in that world. When I speak on stage, I put up an image of a character from a TV show called Billions. There's a guy called Bobby
Yeah.
Axelrod, if you've seen it. He's a hedge fund guy, but I often say that I used to be this guy. And if you ever watch the show, he's pretty direct and pretty focused, but it's all about what's the next amount of money that can be made. I was very much like that back in the day.
Right. And I read that that had a huge impact on your health and your family life
Yeah,
and
everything. What actually ended up happening? So I'll give you because I've kind of led to the piece, and I'll give you the full detail. So we were closing this transaction for a business called Ascend Learning, and it was going well enough. But when you get into sort of high stakes deals, it can get pretty stressful. We ended up closing the deal for over $2 billion. As we were going through that process of that 12 months, that's when my father actually got diagnosed with cancer and died within 12 months of the diagnosis. And all of that happened at the same time. I ended up going to bed one night and I shattered the two molars in the right side of my jaw. It's a really interesting thing. Like you don't think you can crack your teeth, but you can crack your teeth. And I ended up going to the doctor and then the dentist, and they said, "You're living under so much stress. You have to make a change." I ended up speaking to my wife at the time after all this and said, "I need to do something different." So I ended up going to a Tony Robbins event in Chicago about two 2 months after I had the teeth incident, as I call it. And I sat in that room for 4 days learning about different things that I'd never even contemplated thinking about, values and purpose and congruency with those things. And I made a decision in that room. This was June 2018 that I would leave the world of private equity and do what I'm doing now. So it's been 6 years since I made that decision.
it's amazing these clues that life gives you. I've often said that sometimes the universe will tap you lightly on the shoulder and then maybe it'll get a little stronger. And then suddenly it comes in with a sledgehammer if you don't listen. And that, right, you got that right to the molars. The universe was like, nope, you're not listening. So I'm going to make you listen. And as hard as these things are, the molar incident and losing your father, they were also beautiful gifts
Oh,
that
100%.
you can only see in hindsight.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I look at it now and I think the decisions that I made around, so I would, even in the last few years of private equity, I kind of knew that I wasn't doing what I wanted to do or what was serving me, but I was not brave enough to leave it. And this is where the golden handcuffs comes in. When you're making,
Yeah.
good cash, right? Kids are in private school, everything that you would expect that you would have in that world, it's hard to make that transition. Not because I really cared about that, but I didn't want my family to suffer from that, right? So that's the hard bit. I think sometimes people don't make decisions when they're younger but it's easier when you haven't got some of those liabilities around you or things that you want to support. So, yes, the long and the short of it is, had I have not had those incidents happen, had I have not gone to that Tony Robbins event and really given myself time to think and reflect, I probably wouldn't have made the shift. And then who knows what would have happened health wise or whatever else.
Yeah, exactly. We never know where the journey comes, and maybe something else would have happened, but it could have been 10 years down the road. And it's in some ways it's good that it happened when it did because you've made that shift. So I'd love to go back. You alluded to the private equity, and let's dive in since you said you've done some bad things and yet you also own a private equity firm. So I feel like it's interesting to have this conversation from both sides.
Yeah, so it's interesting. People have asked this question because it's very new. Why are you back in private equity after everything that happened? And I'll answer that as we go through this because I think it'll make a lot of sense when I articulate it. But I think what I really sort of wanted to do was take a very, very defined set of skills and experiences. Because I think, as much as people sometimes say, oh, you hate the world of private equity, I don't hate it at all. I love it. I think you have to appreciate what it is and what it isn't. And what I often say to people is like, if you go back to the 1950s, 60s, early 70s, the only way that a business owner could kind of exit their company was if they closed it down, gave it to their kids, or sold it to their competitor. And most of those things were not particularly great outcomes. Obviously, giving it to your kids is better than some of the others, but you're not getting a life-changing wealth event. And private equity really started to become a thing in the 80s. And now, if you look forward, the projection is that if you're going to sell your business for 8 to 9 figures, 80% of those transactions are going to have private equity involvement. So I look at private equity as the biggest opportunity that entrepreneurs have ever had to create life-changing wealth. So if you think of it through that, guys, and you understand that, you think, well, actually, that's interesting. And then the second question is, well, how do I do that? How do I learn that? How do I play that game? And that's where you have to start to realize there are rules, right? And there are ways that it works. And you can't just walk into it with the same experiences you had growing and scaling your company and expect that that's going to be the same way the game is played when you get into the capital markets. So my whole thing was, I've been in this world for over a decade, plus a lot of years doing it outside of private equity. How can I share those experiences with founders who want to achieve that outcome but don't know how to play the game? How can I get ahead of that for them so that they can learn all of this stuff before they exit their companies so that they can have a really great experience through the whole thing?
I love that. So your business is helping them gain the knowledge and the skills and the understanding. And then the private equity firm that you've created, I'm assuming doing things maybe a little bit more ethically
Well, yeah. So
and focused on
I'll explain.
positive outcomes.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
I know I'm teasing you a bit here by not saying. I was out for dinner and someone said to me, and this is relatively recent, the last 18, 24 months. And they said, You've got this reputation for sort of saying all these things about private equity, all the negative things that happen. And I said, well, yeah, I like to be transparent. He said, instead of throwing stones, why don't you get in there and fix it? Oh, I hate you so
Oh.
much. But
We
then,
all need those people in our life, don't we?
well, maybe you do. Maybe you do. So I went away and thought about it. And over the last few years, I've managed to build a really good network of people who have not necessarily come from my experience, but have come from different sort of tangential experiences in this world of capital markets. And we all started to get together and we had this concept of thinking through sort of noble capitalism and how could we reinvent the world of private equity? How could we go in there and do it the right way and provide a different service to founders as opposed to thinking about it as just an exploitation? So what we've created with my firm 9FB Capital is a way of doing it the right way. And the other thing that we've found, interestingly enough, as we've raised capital to invest in the businesses that we want to acquire and support this transition of these business owners to create life-changing wealth, we've found that a lot of investors want to come on this journey too, because they don't want to be on the exploitive side of it. So there's a huge shift away, I think, from it just being about money. It's obviously a part of it, but it's about money, but actually doing it the right way. So that's the reason I got back into it. I wouldn't have joined a private equity firm that I didn't own. And I wouldn't have joined a private equity firm that operated in the way that I'd seen them operate previously. So yeah, so it's private equity, but it's not how it was in my previous world.
I love that. I think one thing that I read on your website as well is that 96% of businesses get rejected when they try to sell. And I think this is an important fact,
Yep.
whether it's private equity or it is somebody else. Why is that? Like, what are the common things that are you see that cause the
Yeah,
96%?
to get quite technical here to help people listening to this, particularly if they are contemplating the idea of building something that is sellable. And what I'll do is I'll break it down into two sides of the coin, you might say, so people can understand how someone like me would assess a business. And most people think it's just about the numbers, right? Most people think it's just about EBITDA, net profit. And it's true to say that you have to get to a certain level of scale within your sort of finances to open up the buying market. And one of the key reasons why businesses don't sell is that they're just subscale. And if you think about supply and demand in any market, if you've got something that you've got too much supply and there isn't much demand for it, then you're not going to have a really great opportunity. And a business that's doing a few hundred grand of EBITDA up to probably about 1 million of EBITDA, those businesses are quite difficult to sell because there's no market to buy them, right? Not certainly in a way that's going to be interesting to the seller. And that's where you see
Right.
distressed deals happening. You see people giving their businesses away because they've got sick or they haven't got a succession plan. So when I say 96% of businesses don't sell, it's because 96% of businesses are quite subscale and they haven't thought through that piece of how they're going to build something that is valuable enough to sell in that way, right? So
And what does that take to get there?
well, I often say to people, there's choices all the way through this. First choice I say is, hey, listen, are you building a lifestyle business or a performance business? Right. And if you're building a lifestyle business, it's quite hard to sell a lifestyle business because just by the pure definition of it, it's there to enhance your lifestyle. So you're going to make decisions. You're going to put things through the business that support your lifestyle. Like you might put your nice car through the business, right? All these sort of things. You might take out more income for the holiday because you want to go and do a life-changing month away with your family. I've seen businesses where they put like racehorses through the balance sheet, right? All sorts of crazy stuff, right? Like there's more to it, right?
Yeah.
But in that situation, right, like you can pivot to a performance business, and I'll define that. You can pivot to that change. However, you've built something that's not really built to sell. Okay. So that's one of the reasons. If you're building a performance business, just by the sheer nature is you're going to make different decisions. You're not going to spend as much money on personal things because you're going to be investing in growth. You might go and raise outside capital from angel investors or venture and things like that. And as soon as you do that, you're already on the pathway because those people are not putting money into a business without a liquidity event into the future. And if you make that decision, I am building a business that is going to one day sell, the next thing you have to think about is what's the number. And I often say, people sort of say, oh, you just build a great business and someone's going to buy it. No, not necessarily. Work out what you want someone to sign a check for in 3-5 years time, whatever that runway is, and reverse engineer absolutely everything from that. So let's say, Laura, your target might be $50 million for your business, right? I would say to you, okay, to give yourself a chance at that number, we need to get your EBITDA to about 5 million. Now, different markets have different valuations, but that's going to be the point where that first part of the puzzle is starting to get solved. At 5 million of EBITDA, you may be able to achieve a 10 times multiple on that, which will give you 50 million. But the most important thing is at 5 million, you open up what's called mid-market private equity, which is where the majority of all that demand sits. It's the top of the bell curve, right? If you're
Okay.
below that, can still sell your business. But if you're above that, you suddenly open up the floodgates of competition. Okay. So that's the first piece. Second piece is how you build the company, right? Which is where what you do comes into this. So the financial side of it is one part, but the multiple that a business is sold for is defined by 15 separate factors. I'll go through some of these today. I've got a book coming out next month actually called Exit for Millions, which has all of them in there. So if people are really interested in
Yes.
this, we'll give them a link to this. But this is where, like, if you have a business where everything revolves around you, right? You are the cog in the wheel, very difficult to sell, right? It's what we call
Yep.
transfer value. If I pay you 50 million to go back to our number again, and you haven't built a machine that can run without you, and you suddenly decide that you don't want to be around anymore because you've got 50 million in your bank account or whatever, that's a huge risk to me, right? So I'm not going to pay a very high multiple for that risk. Okay. And for people who don't understand or maybe haven't thought through the multiple, the best way I describe it is if someone gives you a 10 times multiple on your profit, it's the same as paying 10 years of profit in one day to you. Okay. So if someone's got 10 years of certainty, your business has to be structured in a way that they can see the growth and they can see the sustainability of what you've built.
Yeah, it's not going to suddenly dramatically change once you're gone as the founder.
No, no. And there's so many things that sit underneath this piece. So, as I said, two sides of the coin. You've got the number you need to get to, right? Which is going to give you at least what I call table stakes to be able to have a conversation. And then you've got these other 15 factors. So, within that, we've got a lot of stuff on marketing. right? So if you have a brand that is number one, it's in its identified market, it's unique, it's remarkable, it's differentiated, it's a category of one. Just by default, you raise yourself up the stakes versus everyone else. You stand out,
Absolutely.
like, as Seth Godin says, you're the purple cow, right? So if you have a marketing machine that's driving predictability around how you acquire customers and you have multiple sources of doing that, not just one source, like, for example, if you have a business that relies just on referrals and you haven't got another couple of acquisition channels, again, you're going to get marked down on the multiple. If you haven't got audit ready financials, so that means effectively books that someone can make sense of. And I've been involved in transactions where people have still got like literally shoe boxes full of things. So there's all sorts of different things like that. IP that you can, like, it could be a method. So you mentioned that you have a methodology that you help your clients with. Even if that's just a process that you've come up with that kind of creates an outcome or result that you can kind of almost brand, that creates value because it goes back to that uniqueness. So there's a lot in
Yep.
this. There's things like culture, there's things like recurring revenue, but when I assess a company, I'm looking at these different categories and I'm looking at where the biggest opportunity is to improve them. Then we combine it with the financials. And what will happen then is that you will firstly be able to sell your business easily, but you'll be able to sell your business at the highest point of the multiple. And we can get into this a little bit, but if you understand that piece, that can sometimes mean the difference of tens of millions of dollars when you sell.
Right. So, where do you work with people on the journey? Because I think some people, I don't think people realize how long that process can take and how early before selling you should really start working on all of these things. So, what do you find is that sweet spot in terms of timing?
It's 12 to 36 months, unequivocally.
Yeah.
Now, of course, if you're a very early stage business that's doing 500K of profit and your goal is to sell for 50 million, then the delta between 500K and 5 million EBITDA is substantial. So it does depend. But that's why I've had businesses that are very successful financially. They'll come to me and say, okay, we're thinking about an exit pretty soon, but they're in a mess internally. And then you say, technically, you should be ready to go to market now based on your finances, but there's no way that anyone's going to give you a high multiple. Situations like that, we work in 90-day sprints and we break down in a prioritized order what's going to drive the most value or what's going to mitigate the most risk. We work on those things, right? Or the business works on those things. I have a team that comes in and fixes various parts. But what I say to people when they're going through that sort of process is, as we're doing that, we can actually assess what impact that's having on the valuation. So you can transparently see that if you remove that risk and increase that opportunity, you're adding X amount of millions usually to what the valuation will be.
And I think when it comes to the branding piece that we do, there's only so much we can do if the timeline is really short. Like 12 months is not, we can maybe clean some things up. If you're making like dramatic branding changes, that may be harder actually in the process. So the earlier we can do that, the better. But actually, for the most part, it's even just really looking at the messaging. Like maybe from a visual perspective, there's some inconsistencies and we can kind of behind the scenes clean things up. But the messaging piece to me is so important because it actually makes it easier to sell. If you understand like what makes you different, what you stand for, how you want to be known, your position in the market, like all those things you talked about, your differentiator, the purple cow, the reference, like that's the key piece. That is the first thing we do. That is how I work with our clients through Brand Camp, which, as you mentioned, that's my methodology
Yeah.
and my IP. That's so key. And if everybody just did that piece, it would make the business so much easier to position to potential buyers. Just that one piece alone. Then working with the founder behind the scenes on their personal brand can also help as they're planning out that exit. That can happen anytime, but getting the business brand ready to exit, you can't be making things like name changes or dramatic look and feel changes when you're in that stage because there's so many other things that are happening at the same time.
When I say 12 to 36 months, that's before you would think about even putting your business on the market or listing or whatever you're doing. Because, and I'm very clear, I have teams that can help do the actual sales process, but that's not what I do. So I go in there. Then the first thing I do is assess the company based on the objectives and the outcomes that that founder or shareholders want. And so often it's like, hey, you want to sell the company. What do you want to sell it for? And you'd be surprised how many times people don't even know the answer to that question. Like, I haven't thought about that. And it still astounds me to think, well, I know that you love your company. I know it's probably created some great life for you or whatever else, but we're now gearing up to an event that could change your family for generations. So if you think about it like that, anything that you do too quickly before you trigger a sales process can look reckless. And the other thing I'd say is don't underestimate the quality of the people in private equity to see everything. We see it all. We see the skeletons. Let's say, for example, you've got your business and you want to sell it and you are absolutely the cog in the machine. If you then just bring someone in 6 months ago who could be your successor, I'm going to know through the employment contract when they started, and I'm going to say that's too risky. Whereas if you brought someone in 18 months before and they'd spent time in the business, they'd kind of entrenched their own value into what they're doing, then that's going to add value. You see what I mean? So all of these things,
Absolutely.
firstly, you've got to make the right decisions and you have to know the order and the priority, but you also then have to know the timing and you have to look at how that's all going to construct together before you have the confidence to be able to go out there and lead a process, because you are leading a process even if you have someone else support you doing it, because any buyer is going to be assessing you as the founder as much as they're assessing what you've built.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of founders dream of this, right? They dream of selling their business, but there's also a piece that they fear maybe letting go and that you don't know what you don't know. What do you see with the people you work with in terms of the dream and the fear?
Yeah, again, it comes back to what we said about the runway. So I was told once, I don't 100% believe this. I was told that the number one reason a business doesn't sell is because a seller gets cold feet through the process. And I think that is true at some level of the market, right? Particularly someone who's had 30 years, 40 years of their business and their retirement age and their legacy is everything in that business. I think that is true. But in my world where someone is eyeing an 8 to 9 figure exit, in that situation, it's more that they haven't prepared themselves emotionally for what they're about to get into through the process. So what I do through that period, I'm not just looking at the business, I'm also working as a mentor and a pretty tough advisor to the founder to get them ready for what is going to be an event where they're jumping in the ring with a very formidable opponent. And I often say, remember, this is a once in a lifetime event for you, but the person you're fighting with does this every day, right? So you might not necessarily, we used to call, I'll share this with you because it's quite amusing, back to my horrific private equity days. If someone came to us to sell their company, we would normally put them in one of two buckets. So we would say they were either a prize or a prey, literally those terms. And we would buy either business, right? Because a prize business is like the house that's renovated, right? Like we're going to pay more for it, but we don't need to do anything. It's great, right? But the prey business is the house that needs renovations and is falling apart. Now, we might still buy it because it might have value in the assets, but we're not going to pay very much for it. And here's the horrific bit. Like when we were courting a business, we wouldn't tell you whether you're prize or prey. You just think you're prize, right? So if I'm advising a founder to get ready for this game, we are working on them to be the prize. And so much of it is the psychology of how you handle the conversations, how you show up, how you talk about the business, the energy. Sounds a bit esoteric, but the energy of how you talk to things, because you want to have an air of like, I've got this thing that's valuable. Everyone wants it. You're lucky to have it. There's a way you can get to that energy once you've done the work and understand what that looks like. But if you present that energy to the right financial buyer, it's intoxicating.
Yeah. It's
It's,
interesting.
yeah. So much of it is the psychology. So it's different to the point around the sort of, I suppose, the mindset, but the emotional side of how you can play this game and get the outcome. I also think what it does is it toughens you up for what's next as well, right? Because
Yeah.
you're becoming more congruent and you're also starting to understand a little bit more confidence in yourself. So if your next act is as an investor, or even if it's doing something more purpose driven, you're showing up in a different way. So your identity is such an important part of everything that I do.
100%. That's why I've been excited to have this conversation, because I think there is so much alignment between the way that we think and we approach things from different perspectives. But absolutely agree. And I've used that analogy of the house, that imagine if you invested in the brand, you spend just like a renovation, you spend 20 grand to fix things up, but you can make 100 grand more on the sale of your house. Like relate that to your business, but perhaps 10x that number. We've also worked with people who've bought a business and the brand was a hot mess. And so it was one of those businesses that needed a lot of work. And so then they came to us after, and we completely revamped the business from the buyer instead of the seller.
It's an interesting, and the other thing we probably didn't touch on, but I think is relevant for this conversation is when we assess brands, we assess it from two different ways. We assess the outside in perspective, which is what most people would associate with brands, right? Values, how it looks and feels, but we also do the inside out. And that's where we align the culture. And you'd be surprised how many people get this bit wrong. So let's say you've got a sizable business, you've got in excess of 30, 40 employees or more. If you can define a performance culture and show standards and behaviors that are defined by values, which then align to brand values, it's incredibly valuable. So that's another thing that I think is interesting. It's not just what the thing looks like or how it's messaged, it's how people feel about it day in, day out, driving the vision and the mission of the company.
Yeah. And can the employees live by that mission? Like, do they even know what it is? Like, it's not just me working with a founder on the business brand and then nobody else in the company knowing about it. Like, everybody inside the business should understand it, know it, and be able to talk about and to the brand and to customers in a way that is in alignment with that. Otherwise, it's not translating down and there is no purpose if it's only at the top, but nobody else inside the company experiences it, because that reflects on the clients and on your social media or in all of these different places. Everybody should have the same experience, no matter who they're speaking with in your company, because each person should understand that and even have their own personal brand that aligns with the business. So then if they're on social media and they're doing all of these other things, that they can help build the business because they believe in what they're doing, and then they can share that as well.
That's when we were talking about the 15 reasons piece beforehand. I have a document which is called the Exit for Millions Blueprints, which has the 15 things and it has a way of scoring the things. So red, amber, green. And so I'll give you the link for people to have a look at, because it's an abridged version of what we would use in private equity. But if I'm having a conversation with the founder and I'm asking lots of questions, I'm actually scoring against these criteria. What I often get people to do is literally try and get as 80% of those areas green. And when you're green on that and you have your EBITDA to the number that you think is going to justify the valuation, that's the point where you go to market.
Got it. Okay, that is a very valuable tool. We'll make sure to share the link to that in the show notes and to the podcast. How can people connect with you? What's the best way for them to learn about working with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I tend to hang out on LinkedIn a lot. I always like it when people connect with me there. So you can find me there. My sort of name there is Real Nick Bradley under the LinkedIn profile, but you'll find me. Talk about exiting and stuff. My website is highvalueexit.com. And as I said, I'll get a link for the book that's coming out. So I'm really proud of this. The book I've written, Exit for Millions, has taken 2 years to write, but there's one section in the book where we take someone into a private members club in London for an evening. And it's one of those places that has no sign on the door, but it's where all the private equity guys hang out. And we have a bit of fun actually explaining what the world is like through if you're a fly on the wall in that club.
Ooh, I can't wait to get a copy.
Yeah, you like it.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, I want to wrap it up. One last question,
Sure.
and we'll keep it short, but this is called the Legacy Branding Podcast. And I always ask people about legacy, what legacy means to them and how they're building legacy. So I would love for you to share. What are your thoughts on legacy?
Whenever I think about legacy, I still think about the experience I had with my dad and now my family, right? So I'm very family orientated. I've got a lovely wife and 2 beautiful daughters. I realized back in 2017, what I was doing was not really serving them. So I wasn't making them proud of me. And I wasn't really demonstrating, I think, like really how to properly live your life, right? Because I was living in a lot of fear. So I think of legacy in terms of how I show up these days for everybody that I serve, but most importantly for them, and trying to be the best role model I can be for them by the choices that I make.
I love that. And there's a huge ripple effect when we can show up that way for ourselves and the impact that has on our family, our kids, the clients you work with.
Let me share one last thing. I know we're wrapping up,
Yes.
but I took my 13-year-old daughter, Arabella, to Tony Robbins in New Jersey last November, the same event that I went to in 2018. And in fairness, it was probably a little bit too much for her at 13. And I thought I was a bit disappointed because I wanted her to have a similar experience to me, because it was such a life-changing experience. But you know what's happened this year? Little tiny seeds, if you like, or kind of like little ripples, as you mentioned, have started to sort of seed into her head. And everything that she's doing now is starting to click. And it's that back to your comment around, or your question around legacy. It's just showing them different ways and then letting them learn from those ways. has been probably the main thing that I've really focused on in the last few years.
I love it. Well, I can't wait to read your book and connect more, deep dive into the podcast, your podcast as well. And thank you so much for being here. What an amazing conversation. I appreciate all your insights and stories.
No, thank you very much, Laura. I very much enjoyed it.
Thanks for tuning into the Legacy Branding Podcast. I hope today's episode has inspired and empowered you on your journey to building a brand that truly matters. If you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with other founders who you think would benefit from listening. And if you're ready to take the next step in building your legacy brand, visit our website, labcreative.ca, to learn more and book a call. Don't forget to join us next time for more conversations that will help you navigate your transition and create your legacy. Until then, I'm Laura Beauparlant.